Radium Dial Studio requires the services of several girls for studio work. Ideal location and surroundings. Unusually clean and attractive work. Good pay while learning. This newspaper ad from 1922 would be answered by many young women who would count themselves lucky to have landed such an opportunity. The pay made them top earners in their communities, the job was seen as glamorous, and they got to work in close contact with the new miracle health element, radium. Except, of course, that radium is actually radioactive poison. But they didn't know that. Yet. And welcome to Remember, a podcast about history, mystery, and did you know that prior to World War I, wristwatches were for the ladies? Men used pocket watches. Watches for the wrist were seen as frilly, girly jewelry for the frilly, girly people. And then World War I happened. And you know what's not super practical in a trench in the dark at night, Matthew?
Is it a frilly, girly woman who can barely even hold a gun?
Well, yes.
She should be back at home, sleeping with another man's husband. I'm going to assume that pocket watches weren't ideal for checking the time when you're under fire.
Right, or when it's like dark and you need to use a flashlight to be able to see what time it is. That kind of gives away your position and your plans. So they start making watches for men to wear on their wrists. And on those watch faces, they would paint the numbers to make them glow so they would be readable in the dark.
That's useful and very helpful. I like that idea. What could go wrong?
Hi, everyone. That other voice you hear is, of course, my co-host, Matthew Jude, who happens to be appropriately visually themed for the opening of this episode. You can't see him, but...
Well, I've been dipped in a radium.
He glows in the dark.
People have said you glow, and that's what it is.
Now, he has been growing a mustache, and it does make him look like a British soldier in World War I. Like ace fighter pilot Chuck?
I don't... British?
Charlie Danger. Ace fighter pilot Charlie Danger.
You can't even...
The Americans call him Chuck.
Your mind is so American warped. You've got nothing inside there but cotton candy, fluff, and Pop-Tarts.
And I'm Paula. And yes, I prefer my Pop-Tarts without the frosting on them. So...
That's
the hill I'm going to die on.
That is psychotic.
That's just, I wasn't allowed to eat the ones covered in frosting growing up.
So now you can have those ones.
But I don't want them. I learned to like the other ones and now I prefer them. Back to the actual topic at hand. These glow-in-the-dark watches. The paint they used to do this was a mixture of zinc sulfide, a glue substance, and a new element that had just been discovered by Mary Curie and her husband Pierre.
That's fun.
Yeah, radium.
Oh, good.
It was discovered in the 1890s. So it's only been around for 20 years at this point, maybe.
It's like that episode of Star Trek where Data goes back in time and he's got that radioactive stuff happening. Gosh, that's a good episode. That's a great episode.
I love all the episodes where they're doing weird time travel and holodeck shenanigans.
But they find his head and it's just, there he is again. Oh, God.
That's the one with Mark Twain is in it.
Yeah.
So not much is known at this point about radium. But one of the things they did know was that if you mixed it with the zinc sulfide, the alpha particles from the radium decay would cause the zinc sulfide to glow.
How very useful.
Hey, it's handy. The other thing they knew is that radium was great at treating cancer.
The other and only other thing they knew.
Yeah, basically this is it. They could apply it to a tumor and it would speed up the rate of decay of the tissue to remove the tumor.
Oh, great. That's exactly what we use it for today.
And because it was stimulating the red blood cells, it would also cause people to look flushed and healthy. They called it the miracle element.
This is fantastic. Where can I get some?
Right. They began using it for all sorts of health and beauty products. You could buy some radium water. Just drink it down. Hair treatments, cleansers, vitamin tablets, makeup, toothpaste.
I guess it would make your teeth glow.
Sure did whiten them.
The thing is that what worries me about all this, Paula, is we say, these idiots, they didn't know that they were all poisoning themselves.
Yeah.
And in like 100 years' time, they're going to
Exactly.
say, and they slept in Bluetooth headphones, and we all
Yes.
find out something terrible.
I could not help but think those very same thoughts the whole time I was working on this episode. I was like, who knows what we're doing now that is the equivalent of this?
A lot of these people at this time was saying, my gosh, we need to stop using lead in everything,
Arsenic and green dye.
That's well remembered from an episode at the very start of this show.
Radium was really popular. All these products, they were really popular. And radium itself became crazy expensive. So in today money, it was something like 1 gram of radium would cost a company $2 million to buy. In today money. It was, yeah. So in something that helped the general public, I think a lot of these products didn't actually have real radium in them. They were just labeled like they did.
I'd still be annoyed, actually. I would still want my money back, even though I was going to get out of it alive.
All that to say that this was seen as high-end and glamorous and, above all, good for you.
Glowing.
So, when the United States Radium Corporation, originally known as Radium Luminous Material Corporation, but I will be referring to it throughout this episode as the United States Radium Corporation, and the Radium Dial Company opened up locations in Orange, New Jersey, and Ottawa, Illinois, respectively, the women in those towns felt like they'd won the lottery. Most of the women hired...
They were hiling?
We're not quite to World War II yet. Yeesh.
This radium makes me want to just become a fascist.
Most of the women hired as dial painters.
Oh, it's fashionable, not fashionistable.
Not fascismable. Most of the women hired as dial painters were from working class families, and they were young. The youngest on record was 11, but that's an outlier. Typically, they were somewhere from like 18 to their early 20s. And they were making good money for the time. Like some of them became the breadwinners for their families because the pay put them in the top 5% of wage earners in the United States.
Wow.
So this is not only huge for women, but also just in general.
Is this because they're dealing with a luxury high-end product? Essentially, it's got to be done right because if they do it wrong, it's so... I mean,
It was
it's
skilled
$1 million
work.
for a gram, you know?
Yeah, I think because it was skilled work and because the material they were working with was so valuable in and of itself. So I'm going to tell you how much they got paid. They got paid per dial face they painted. And it's not going to sound like a lot to you, but at the time, it was inflation, how far dollar went, all of that. It was. They were paid 1.5 cents per dial face. And if they were really good, they could paint 200, 250 in a day.
Well, remember what the bloody newsboys were earning? They were earning, 30 cents a day or something?
Oh, yeah. And these girls are making like $3 a day. So, yes. Yeah.
So they're earning a good wage.
It's pretty incredible. The average, according to the IRS, people were reporting like $3,400 as their yearly income. So it's pretty good, yeah. And so, of course, the more dial faces they painted, the more they made every day.
Are they single?
Some of them, but they are all dead now.
I'm thinking about, 18 plus, making a good wage. You're talking my money. You're talking my language. Independently wealthy, slowly going insane. That's what I want.
Slowly crumbling, literally.
Well, actually, this reminds me so much of hat makers using mercury. That's what we have in the Mad Hatter. They were all inhaling mercury fumes. And it just was sending them...
Making them lose, yeah.
Insane, literally.
So the women all sat together at desks or long tables to do their work in rooms with big, bright windows. they were given the materials to mix their own paint. So they'd get a little tray with all their little watch dial faces on it, and then a bit of radium powder, the zinc sulfide, the glue, and then like a dish of water to rinse their brush in. So then they'd mix up their own paint. And they would be given a teeny tiny camel hair brush. Because I want you to think for a second about a wristwatch and how big a watch face on a wristwatch is. And based on that, how big the numbers on that face are. They're quite small.
This is not a job I could do. Let's be very clear.
So the brushes would only have like 30 hairs on them. They were really tiny brushes. And they needed to have very fine points to help them control the paint for this very detailed work. And for anyone who has painted anything small like this, you know that your brush does not stay pointed. As you use it, the hairs spread out and that point needs to be reformed.
Oh, God. Oh, no.
The women,
they're putting it in their mouths.
they were instructed to use the lip dip paint technique, which is basically where you lick the brush and use your lips to form it into that fine point, dip it in the paint, and then apply that paint. Some of the painters would do this between each number on the dial face. Some would do it after every stroke.
It doesn't matter how often you're doing it, right?
They are, of course, getting radium-based paint on and in their mouths.
Would just being around the paint be enough to get you, probably? Or is it so little?
I think the paint itself isn't so bad, but you'll see, like, there's a lot of dust everywhere.
Yeah.
In this, we'll talk about it more, but it's really the ingesting of the radium that really gets them here more than the any topical effects. But it is all around. It's not good. It's not good.
Well, regardless, it's not ideal, right?
Yeah, and management is telling them actually that this is completely fine. It's not toxic. It's actually kind of a perk because this stuff is good for you, remember? You can take it as vitamins.
Don't drink it all.
You can drink it as water. Yeah. This is expensive. And here you are getting it for free. Got a little powder left over at the end of your shift? Take it home with you. Paint your nails or your teeth to make them bright and white. Let off steam by painting your faces and going into a dark room and laughing at how you look like you're playing laser tag or like you're at a rave, which is two references that they wouldn't get, but we get them, so.
I actually, correct me if I'm wrong here, and I know quite a lot about history, but I believe they were playing laser tag in the dance halls of the early 1920s. Now,
Yeah, with full on with black light and everything. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I believe that's something they were doing, and you would listen to, I believe the band was called Linkin Park.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they'd play that, and you would run around and shoot people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And your name that you gave yourself would be something to do with Final Fantasy VII. This is a personal story about the laser quest near my house, where I was a member.
So they are literally like, they're having fun with it. This is a great job. They're like working with their friends. The conditions are great. They're working with this like miracle item. They are like painting themselves up and being like, look at ourselves in the dark. Look at this silly thing and my face is glowing, you know? There's no special clothing for them to wear or caps to cover their hair. They began to be known around town as ghost girls because the radium powder dust would get all over them and they'd glow a bit walking around after their shift. It wasn't unusual for a worker to wear her best dress to her shift that day if she was planning to go dancing after work.
So it could glow.
It would mean, her clothes would be all luminescent and sparkly at the club. Dance hall.
The problem with this is that this is no one's fault.
At first.
Right now, this is no one's fault. They don't know what's going to happen. Oh, this is like watching a slow motion wreck.
It's bad. Yeah, management is telling them this is a perk of the job. It's fun. It's good. It's healthy. You're so lucky. The American Medical Association actually approved ingesting radium for medical usage from 1914 until 1932. Meanwhile, in the lab where the radium powder is being made and processed, the scientists and lab workers are full on in protective gear while working with this stuff. The co-founder of the United States Dial Corporation, Sabin von Suchalki, was also the inventor of the radium paint that the girls were using. And he knew that concentrated exposure to radium was not safe. He'd suffered burns from it. Marie Curie had suffered burns while working with radium. I think at first, like we said, I think they really thought the dial painters didn't need to worry about their exposure to radium because it was in such small amounts. They're like, this is not going to hurt them. It wasn't going to burn them. But the women weren't just touching it. They were ingesting it. I did see in one of my research sources, and this might be apocryphal, I don't know, but it's a good story. So one of my sources...
Oh, tell us anyway. We love a good apocryphal story on Remember.
About Sochoki visiting the workshop of his company one day and seeing a dial painter licking her brush and went over and scolded her and said, don't do that. But he didn't tell her why. And when she asked her manager, she's like, how come the guy who owns our company told me not to do this thing that you said we should be doing? Her manager was like, no. It's fine. It's company policy to do that, to point the brush with your mouth. I don't know if this happened, but...
Oh, I'm dreading this. I'm just dreading this story. Go on.
Yeah. And of course, women start getting sick.
Oh, thank God. So it's just women getting sick, right?
It's just women. Well, eventually, I don't talk about him at all. There is one man who gets sick and dies, and that's when the company starts paying attention.
That's the real tragedy. That's the real tragedy of the whole situation.
But for now, it's not that big of a deal because it's just the women. No one knows what's wrong with them or what's causing it. And then they start dying. So the first dial painter to die is named Amelia Molly Maggia. It's 1922, and she's somewhere around 25 years old.
Okay.
She worked as a dial painter from 1917 to 1921. So just a heads up for everyone, I'm going to be describing in the next few minutes the physical ailments of these women. So I'm just going to give the next couple minutes of the podcast a light body horror content warning. I'm not going to go into crazy detail because I was writing the script right before I ate dinner and I didn't want to gross myself out. But if that's a no for you, dog, then just skip ahead a couple minutes. Molly started feeling unwell in 1921. She was in pain and having specifically a lot of toothaches. So she went to the dentist and they'd pull the tooth, but then it would never heal. It would stay this infected abscess, which hurt and was gross.
Do you remember when I had an abscess?
Yes, I was thinking about you while I was writing this. I know you know how painful something like this would be.
It's not just painful, it's excruciating, and it also does come with a lot of unpleasantness because you have something rotting in your mouth. It's vile.
And this kept happening. Tooth after tooth was needing to be pulled, and they were not healing. And no one knew why. Brace yourself. One day, the dentist goes to pull another tooth, Matthew, and a whole section of her jaw lifted out with it.
Yeah.
It just came out in his hand. And he's just like, oh, I have a portion of your jaw in my hand. And a few days after that, she died of a massive hemorrhage.
Yeah.
So here's what happens with radium. It's chemically very similar to calcium, except it's radioactive and calcium isn't. So if it gets inside your body treats it like it's calcium and it pulls it into your bones. But of course, calcium strengthens your bones and radium destroys them. And these women have been painting poisonous fake calcium onto their teeth and swallowing it with each brush lick.
So their mouths were just decaying away.
Yeah. There became a thing called radium jaw because of so much necrosis of the jaw that was happening to all of these women.
This is also an incredibly unpleasant way to go.
It's awful.
Do you know what I mean? It's not like there was an accident at the factory and they're all dead in seconds. No, this is
years of chronic illness that no one can explain.
God.
One of the women reports, I think eventually she reports that she's 36 and she feels like she's 80. It's wrecked her body so much.
Yeah.
So the dial painters start developing anemia, having hip problems. All of their teeth are falling out. Some get large tumors. If you Google this, just so you know, you're going to find an image. I am not going to put this image in any of our stuff because I think it's horrible. But of a woman with an incredibly large tumor, like underneath her jaw.
Yeah.
It's awful. One woman ends up with a grapefruit-sized tumor on her leg or her hip.
Exactly what you would think would happen to people if they're exposed to radiation, essentially.
Yeah. One has her spine just collapse because it cannot support the weight of her body. And the companies don't want to take any responsibility. They don't want to admit that they could be responsible. In 1924, the United States Radium Corporation ran an internal study to see if the women really were suffering from radiation poisoning from the radium paint. Dr. Cecil Drinker ran the investigation and reported back to the USRC that, yes, the women were likely being poisoned by the radium.
I listened to a quote from him, and he went into the office, and they said, well, are they suffering from radiation poisoning? And I think if I'm correct in saying this, he just yelled the word, "Godoy!"
Godoy! Yeah.
He kept on going, duh! Yeah!
More than half the women measured were radioactive.
God.
So the USRC, of course, pretends that investigation never happened. They do a new one, and they pay some doctors to say, everything's fine. Radium's safe. No signs of anything bad. They also start telling people that the things those women are dying of, actually it's syphilis. Because they want to ruin the women's reputations. And syphilis is an STD.
Well, because as well, Mary Curie, she died of anemia. Well,
caused from
but
radiation poisoning.
Radiation poisoning. Yeah. And that's the thing that everyone always says. It's like, you still cannot go. Her books will be radioactive for thousands of years, and that's one of those facts you find out as a kid.
And you're like, what? Yeah. Molly Maggia's death certificate actually lists her official cause of death as syphilis.
That's so
wrong.
Such a disservice to
one of the women working in Ottawa, Illinois, buckle up, for the Radium Dial Company, Peg Looney. She kept working even though she was getting sicker and sicker. She had developed anemia. Her teeth were, of course, falling out. Her fiancé often pulled her around in a little red wagon because she was too weak to walk. And then one day at work, after being a dial painter for 6 years, she collapsed. She was sent to the company hospital, and her family was not allowed to see her. They were told she had diphtheria and needed to be quarantined. Peg dies. Her family insists on sending their doctor to do an autopsy.
Yeah, they're a company. They're not the government. They're not. It's just a company. They don't run the world. They can't keep a corpse hostage.
So yeah, the company's like, of course, we'll do it at this day, at this time. See you there. When the family doctor showed up at the appointed date and time,
just a man with a gun.
The company doctor had already done an autopsy, and then they sent Peg's body to be buried. They just did it like an hour before they said they were going to.
This is so disgusting.
Yeah. Peg's official cause of death? Diphtheria. And there was nothing the family could do. So, the women start suing the companies.
Are any of these companies still around?
Not in these forms. There might be new companies that came out of these, but not in these forms. So women start suing these companies, right? Now remember, there are 2 specific companies and 2 specific groups of women. I've kind of lumped them all together at this point, but I'm going to start to separate them out a little. So in Orange, New Jersey, you have the United States Radium Corporation, and that workshop was established before the Radium Dial Company in Ottawa, Illinois. So the New Jersey women get sick and start dying first. In 1927, 5 of the New Jersey dial painters all filed a suit against the USRC. Catherine Schaub, Grace Fryer, Quinta Magia McDonald, Albina Magia Larice, and Edna Hussman. Quinta and Albina were sisters of Molly, that first woman who died.
That's one of the biggest things about this. You getting your sister a job, and
they're like, come work with me at this amazing thing. It's great. They're all getting jobs for each other. They're all getting sick. So the USRC starts using delaying tactics to keep the trial from happening. They're like, wow, this is past the statute of limitations. You can't, it's been like 2 years. You haven't even worked here for 2 years. How can you claim that these health issues you're having now are related to the job you did 2 years ago? These kinds of things. By the time the hearings begin, none of these women had the strength to raise their arms to take their oath to testify.
Yeah, they're trying to wait. They know these women are going to die.
Yes.
So they're trying to wait them out.
Absolutely. 2 of the women are bedridden at this point. The company delays again. So they have their initial hearings in January and April, and then the company is granted an adjournment until September. Because they're like, oh, some of our people are going on vacation for a couple months for the summer holiday. The women are like, we're going to die before we get to finish this. So they decide to just settle. The company, in this agreement, would not take legal responsibility for their health. But
are they still using the radium?
Yes, absolutely. Nothing has changed at this point.
This is absolutely mind-blowing.
They did agree to pay each woman $10,000 each. They would cover their medical bills, and they would get $600 a year for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, but they know they're all about to die.
Yeah. So as things start to kick off in Ottawa with the workers at the Radium Dial Company, the RDC was worried that their workers would catch wind of the suits that had happened a few years earlier in New Jersey. In 1931, they fired Catherine Donahue, a dial painter who had worked for them for years and had been feeling ill since 1925. Catherine had begun limping, and the company thought it made them look bad. So they fired her. The New Jersey women want to sue, but at this point, it's the 1930s, and it's the middle of the Great Depression. The Radium Dial Company was keeping the town afloat with jobs. This is a company town. This is how the town isn't suffering because of the Great Depression. So no one wants to take on their case. By the time they find a lawyer, it's 1937. And the company is again claiming that the statute of limitations has run out. They've also, Matthew, closed up that company, moved their location to New York State, and formed themselves under a new name. So that gives them a lot of financial protection against this suit because the company...
That company doesn't exist anymore.
Exactly. The company starts putting out these statements where they're like, these women were crippled when we hired them. We were doing a community service by bringing on these women with health issues. And this is how they're repaying us by blaming us for problems they already have. We're the good guys here.
Paula is giving me a look now, as if to say that they, in fact, were not the good guys.
This case finally goes to trial.
You seem legitimately angry. I'm going to say that.
It's disgusting. Catherine Donahue was so weak during the trial that she collapsed after giving testimony in court, and they had to continue her part of the hearing from her home while she lay in bed. They literally did part of the court case from her house.
I wouldn't want to be near any of these women.
No.
In a way, I'm like, but they don't know. No one knows. But they know, but it's not like common. Yeah, this is.
Well, they're having to figure out how to measure them to prove that they are radioactive. Yeah. Many doctors and scientists worked hard to prove in court that the women had been victims of radiation poisoning because of their jobs. They're coming in with measurement tools that have been developed to see, like, they do these breath tests where the women breathe out and they measure how much, like, Radiation is in their breath.
Well, the Geiger counter had been invented at this point, but you can't just go in. I don't think that's going to work, right?
They're called like electrometers. I didn't write in a whole bunch of stuff in the episode about how they measured it because it's, for me, a bit more of a complicated scientific process than I felt like I could explain. But
Yeah.
they're doing these breath tests for women who have died. They are getting permission to like test their bones, the bits of their bones that are left for radiation. And they are proving that these women are radioactive. Even though the Radium Dial Company is bringing in their own experts to testify to the opposite, of course. But the court finally found in favor of the women. The Radium Dial Company appealed 8 times, Matthew, taking it all the way to the Illinois State Supreme Court, which upheld the ruling. So there's no more, they cannot appeal anymore. They are responsible. But because they'd moved their company out of state and given it a new name, they were barely financially liable. All the women in the Ottawa suit had to share a settlement of $10,000 instead of each getting that amount individually.
It's just such a huge injustice.
I mean, their medical bills, their inability to work and provide for their families, just they're mortgaging their houses, they're going bankrupt trying to take care of themselves.
They're going to die.
Yeah, yes, and they're dying. The reason that Catherine Donahue collapses after her testimony in court is actually because they put a doctor, a scientist on the stand and asked him, is there any cure for radiation poisoning? And he was like, the women are in the room right now. Do you want me to say the real answer to this? And they're like, yeah. And he's like, no, there is nothing that can be done. They will die. And she collapsed. So barely any money gets paid out. But new standards and protections are put into place for dial painters and other people working with radium. Dial painters are no longer told to lip point their brushes. They're given proper protective clothing for work, a special place to mix their paint, ventilation. It becomes like much more regulated and protected. And the women who begin being dial painters later in this time period, a lot of them have health problems, but they actually live to an old age. They might have cancer, but a lot of them, I think the last one who was living died in 2014, maybe?
This first batch of women didn't go to work to become martyrs.
No. And they all died. They're like 23, 24. Catherine was a bit older. She was in her 30s. She left behind a husband and 3 kids. Like,
it's such a god-awful tragedy. It's so awful.
Yeah, it's really...
Yeah.
I mean, talk about being brave. Because especially these girls in Ottawa, these women in Ottawa, they got a lot of flack for what they were doing because the town depended on this company. But because of them, future radium workers were protected. These, radium girls, as they're called, were studied by science. The ones who were living, and then permission to exhume bodies from ones who had died so that they were able to learn more about radium and the effects of radioactive elements. And that meant that when the Manhattan Project came around, those workers had standards of protection in place because so much more was known because of the Radium Girls. The Radium Girl court cases were some of the first where employees won compensation from an employer, and also led to the eventual creation of OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration in the U.S., which protects, of course, just as you'd guess, the safety and health of employees in the workplace. Now, this wasn't created until 1971, but it is cited at its creation that the Radium Girl cases were a direct influence on wanting to put this administration in place. Y'all, there is so much more to know. So many individual stories and crazy details. You could very much do an entire podcast series on just this. I have no idea if I've done this story justice. If you want to know more, please look into it. There's so much information to find.
Well, if it helps, Paula, I'm angry as hell. This is terrible.
And you're not going to take it anymore. Look into the book, The Radium Girls, The Dark Story of America's Shining Women by Kate Moore. That's a great resource. I also used a great paper written by Bert M. Corsi, the National Bureau of Standards and the Radium Dial Painters, where he talked a lot about the science and the responsibility of the National Bureau of Standards working with radium and what was their responsibility to let people know about the dangers of the substance. It talks a lot about what happened. You can even find the site of the Radium Dial Company in Ottawa has been named as like a site that needs to be cleaned up because of how like radioactive that whole area is. And they found a bunch of old documents in that building that have been digitized and put up on the internet. You can see letters, memos, court documents, transcripts. I spent so long looking through a bunch of it. It's absolutely fascinating. It's only digital because most of the materials, like Matthew was saying about Mary Curie, were radioactive, so they destroyed basically the originals. There's so much to find if you want to know more. It's an incredible story.
Is there a movie? This sounds like they could make a movie.
There is a movie that came out, I think, just a few years ago that I don't know that I could bring myself to watch. I thought about it, but I was like, I think it's just going to make me sad and angry.
Yeah.
But there is a movie called Radium Girls that you can find as well. I'm going to finish with just one more crazy fact. During the New Jersey court case, they exhumed Molly Maggia's body to test it for radioactivity and found that it had 500 times what would later be set as a limit for the human body burden of radium. 500 times. Radium has a half-life of 1,600 years, which means the women dead and buried in the 1920s and 30s, their remains will still be radioactive for 1,500 more years from the day you listen to this. A millennia and a half more of their bodies still being radioactive. You can take a Geiger counter to their graves and get readings. Some of them apparently have been buried in lead coffins, and thank goodness that they were brave enough to fight against this.
Yeah.
Because they have given the rest of us, at least in the U.S., protections that we did not have before.
Well, they changed the world.
Yeah, they did change the world.
Thank you so much, Paula, for doing the research on this. I know at times it was not pleasant for you to do, but I really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed learning about this, then please, the best ways you can help us are to rate this podcast 5 stars, leave a review of this podcast. Even one word will help us out an absolute ton. It helps us get noticed in the algorithm, really does. You can't know how much it really does help a podcast to just rate it 5 stars and to leave a comment as well. If you're on YouTube, you can like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. That is something that really helps us out in the algorithm as well. And the best way anyone can help us is to, of course, tell someone about the show who you think might enjoy it as well. Thank you again so much, Paula, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.